getting to know a little bit better out there. And yeah, sounds good. So, it looks like we've got the majority of probably the folks that are joining on Zoom hopped in. So there'll be a few people that join us as well. We'll put a link in Facebook and YouTube, and that link will allow you to join the Zoom directly. We encourage you to do that. We may or may not jump off the live stream early, and then continue the Zoom call. So you want to be a part of the action in here. I will start to give an intro to the program then and introduce our guests and the topics for today, and we'll get rolling. Thanks everyone for being here. I will say welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. We gather here every Saturday. We meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world. This could include manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, all sorts of folks. And this includes, of course, piano technicians. Our mutual goal is to become better at a craft, to help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses. It's an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more on pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. You can also subscribe to Radio Hour for just $16 a month. You can get direct access to each week's private Zoom call, as well as the archival recordings of, I think we're at around 190 episodes in our member area, doing this for a couple of years now. You can join Piano Tech Radio Hour and subscribe at bit.ly/join PTRH. That's bit.ly/join PTRH. We're also going to put into the chat here a couple of things that are going on right now. We've got a really awesome masterclass coming up on the 15th of February, just in a few days, with Ken Walkup, a veteran master of the piano industry himself. He'll be discussing the history of the piano action from the Baroque era to the 20th century. Masterclass, again, is on 15th of February, 6 p.m. Pacific. Sorry, I'm reversing that. 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can find out more at this link that we're putting in the chat. I guess I'll say it. It's a little bit awkward. pianotechniciansmasterclass.com/Ken-Walkup Ken-Walkup-2024. We'll have to get a short link for that together. And then we'll get started here. Let me introduce our guest, and then Emrys also remember to let people in from the waiting room as they join. I'm seeing a couple people jumping in now. Good to see you all. Let's introduce today's guest. This is Itzhak. It's spelled Isaac, Isaac, and we all like, some people say Isaac. I enjoy saying it appropriately because I know you say Itzhak.
Isaac, if you're taking the French.
Isaac?
Yeah.
Isaac, is that it? Okay, great.
Either. Depends on what side of the
like,
family you're on. Yeah.
Now, the last name, I don't know that I know how you say it. I'm going to give a stab at it. Namias?
Very close. Namias.
Namias. Okay. So,
Yeah.
Isaac Namias.
That's correct.
Awesome. Fun to say. Let's get a bio on Isaac. After graduating from Indiana University, where he studied jazz pedagogy at the Jacob School of Music under the late iconic David Baker, Isaac moved to New York to pursue his passion, playing and studying piano in the Mecca of music. Soon after, he began apprenticing with craftsman Brian Whiten, who's also been on the show from Big Wrench Piano Care. Itzhak worked closely with him and other technicians to learn how to rebuild and tune pianos. He then had the opportunity to work for the legendary Steinway & Sons Company, where he learned more about piano rebuilding from a tradition of multi-generational artisans and did some piano sales and consulting as well. As a pianist, a piano teacher, and piano tuner, he wanted to create an outlet in Brooklyn, New York, for those who are seeking risk-free, reliable, and beautiful pianos. Isaac's store, Prosper Pianos, is a culmination of a lifelong dream and love affair with music. The company is named after his father, Prosper Namias, who changed the course of his life when he bought the family a piano. Isaac is now proud to be a part of that process for others. Hey, I have to say, before I say welcome, similarly, my mom, I remember she invested in this really awesome upright piano, put a lot of energy and thought into purchasing it, got great advisement on it, and probably spent way more than she had budgeted for something like that. I still got that piano today, changed the course of my life as well. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Isaac, welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour.
Thank you, Ethan. Glad to be here.
My pleasure. Yeah, and I'll just say, I lived in New York several years ago for about a decade and founded a floating piano factory. And since then, I've kind of been moving around. We met like a few times back in the day as you were kind of getting rolling in the area, but didn't connect that much until maybe the past year or so. We started doing some collaborations, and things have been going really well. A stand-up guy that can then help you out in a pinch, and so that's been really cool. And we're learning some things from each other. So I would love to get a little bit of your background here. You mentioned you you did your education at Indiana University, studied jazz. I've heard you play. It's really great. You're a really talented musician as well. Um, Tell me a little bit more about that journey, and maybe like, I know it's always a big decision to become a musician, to study music, and then it's a big transition to become a piano technician. So maybe you could tell us about that and address those kind of two pivotal moments.
Totally. And I think it's no coincidence that where I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, which is where I was living prior to moving to New York, there was actually a piano dealer, piano restorer that had his business maybe 2 blocks away from my house. And it was also across the street from the Jazz Kitchen, which is maybe the major jazz club in Indianapolis. And I have so many memories kind of spending time in between both places, whether it was getting into the jazz club to hear the music, pretending like I was 21. We'll let that slide, hopefully, for the musicians that were eager to get in before they were allowed to. And yeah, I spent a ton of time at that piano store. Now, as a kid, I had no interest in being in the rebuilding shop. It was dusty. The guys seemed kind of cranky, and I really was in the showroom playing the pianos, annoying the heck, I'm sure, out of the sales team there. And yeah, so I don't know. I always like looking back and knowing that there was kind of like the shadow of piano technology was always sort of there looming in the background. And I remember having the piano tuners over to my house and certainly sitting there listening to the tuning, asking a few questions, always having kind of like a vague fascination with it, but not really getting involved in piano technology until about 11 years ago. But prior to that point, my whole life was studying piano, and a big part of that journey was coming out to New York to study with different piano teachers. Um, because my father is French, we actually lived in France for about the first 7 years of my life. And I was spending some time going out to visit him when he was living in France. And so I would stop in New York and take some piano lessons and take an opportunity to go to the jazz clubs in New York, open up a copy of like the Village Voice, and see who that used to be in Miles Davis's band is still alive and well and playing music. And oh my gosh, I can go out and hear them tonight. So yeah, initially my draw to New York was definitely focused on coming out here to play music, to be a part of the music, and kind of continue in that tradition. And I remember when I was 14, there was a performance at the Jazz Kitchen. It featured someone who became a teacher and a mentor of mine, a guy named Dan Tepfer, who's a phenomenal jazz piano player, classical pianist. And I remember being in the back of that club, and I can't even tell you what tune it was, but I just remember feeling like an overwhelming sense of ecstasy just kind of flowing through my body, and I felt so connected. And I knew that even if I would be poor the rest of my life, if I could just continue being a part of music, that would be like my greatest joy. And yeah, that kind of moment really fueled me to practice harder. Eventually, it led to me applying to go to music school, getting into Indiana University, and ultimately kind of led me out to New York. So that was sort of my journey in music. And what
So
I
you
discovered,
actually, let me
yeah,
get this straight. So you did have some experiences in New York before you actually went to Indiana University. Okay, I didn't realize that. Okay,
I
very
did.
cool.
I probably had no business being out here in those years, but I somehow managed to stay at like a youth hostel in Times Square, and I would take the train to Brooklyn. And yeah, it was all super exciting and inspiring for me back then.
Yeah, that sounds like quite an adventure.
Yeah.
Uh, um, So you went out to Indiana University, you got to study with David Baker, whose name is I think he was the one who would make those like music minus one type of things, right? So that's one of
Oh,
the ways he got super famous is kind of the backup band for your practicing and stuff like that, right?
exactly, the play-alongs. And yeah, I mean, David Baker was actually in New York City the day that Kind of Blue was recorded and like got to have a conversation with Bill Evans,
Wow.
and Coltrane. And he was definitely a big part of the culture before he moved to Indiana. And I think, I'm not sure, but maybe started the first Collegiate Jazz program. Whatever
Hmm.
it was. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely an icon in education. So that's a really great opportunity. Um, yeah, and in Indianapolis, it's not far from where I am in the Chicago area.
I,
So we've got a similar Midwestern experience. Um, so would love to talk about, and we kind of touched upon, um, where you kind of got into the piano industry and you worked with Brian White in a little bit. Um, what was the moment here where you got into piano technology specifically? I don't think we covered that.
well, to be fair, when I was in college, I rebuilt a few Fender Rhodes pianos, like literally just through looking at YouTube videos. I think I found a book at the library, and yeah, just took it upon myself to go through that journey. I had no background in engineering or construction. I spent my whole life avoiding hurting my hands, protecting my hands. So I wasn't like a power tools kind of guy. So it definitely was like a real left field endeavor. But yeah, I don't remember exactly what inspired me to do it. I had that Fender Rhodes in my dorm room, took it to my first apartment, sold it, bought another one, and I did that a few times in college. So when I first went and kind of walked into Brian's shop in Brooklyn, I mentioned that to him, and I think for him that was like maybe a seed of promise. Like, okay, this guy obviously has this curiosity. I didn't have a background at that time in tuning or rebuilding. I knew nothing about it. I only had my background in music. And oftentimes, I think for people in the piano technology world, they're not looking for musicians to join the team necessarily. You're looking for people that are focused, you're looking for people that are disciplined, and while these things could be mutually exclusive, I find oftentimes musicians hold those qualities. And certainly a lot of that mentality that I was developing as a classical pianist, as a jazz pianist, I kind of took that in with me when I was sort of exploring the idea of getting into piano technology. Ultimately, Brian mentioned that somebody was leaving the shop, there was an opening, and maybe I should just give it a try. And yeah, I think that I wasn't sure what it would lead to. I think when I was first giving it a shot, I was also still playing piano 3 nights a week in New York. I was working at a restaurant 6 days a week. I was a barista 5 mornings a week. I was a caterer. I was really doing everything I could to sustain myself. I also taught piano. So yeah, I just found that amongst I don't know, I was playing a lot of the music gigs that weren't really about the music, they were about being in the background, and I was sort of kind of at the lowest totem pole of like live piano performance. And it sort of felt a little like spiritually demoralizing, this craft, this like thing that I had been, putting my heart into my whole life was sort of being capped at $75, for 3 hours of solo piano. So I noticed that in the shop, when I was in the shop, I don't know, there was a sense of unity. There was a sense of we're all coming here together to put ourselves into this one thing. And it was nice for the first time in my life, being a solo piano player, to like sort of be a part of a team. And I think that that in itself, was sort of making me feel more comfortable with piano technology. And I discovered that the more I went to the shop, the more I applied myself, the more I practiced, the more I got out of it. And I quickly learned, much like studying piano, learning big, complicated pieces, piano technology is sort of, there's a craft to it, but then there's also the knowledge. And so I was really able to just jump in and really dive deep into that pursuit. And yeah, I have a lot of fond memories of getting to the shop early, doing my temperament, doing my tunings. And, I essentially, at some point, I just started going there every day. Whether I had other kind of jobs earlier in the day, I would just always make time to get to the shop. And frankly, I was driven by the knowledge. I was driven by, yeah, assimilating these new concepts. And then, of course, I understood that it was about experience and that I needed to do that concept over and over and over again to have a better grasp on that mastery, proficiency, efficiency. So yeah, I just found a lot of crossover with the mindset that I had as a piano player in that shop. So it kind of, I think, crept up on me, really, to answer your question. Like when I knew I was going to be pursuing the path of being a piano technician, I think that, yeah, I just kept doing it and it just kept rewarding me. And it kind of brought me all the way up to the point that I've landed at today. Um,
Cool.
my
Yeah.
retail shop and my retail tuning business and whatnot.
Yeah, as with a lot of the stories that we come across, there's a certain magnetism for the folks that end up in the industry, And we've had folks that went off to business school and thought they were gonna, and then they're back in the piano industry. For those that fit, it kind of attracts and sort of rewards reinvestment.
And I
Um,
can't understate that, how inspired I was by Brian, by his professionalism, by his dedication to the craft, by his like, yeah, deep, deep love and knowledge of pianos. I wanted to align myself with that. And, it really took somebody that I had was able to look up to for me to able to kind of climb that ladder, per se. And certainly had a lot of other mentors I ran into. A big one that comes to mind is Dan Levitan. He's been an invaluable, humble source of information. I feel like his book, The Craft of Piano Tuning, explained piano tuning to me in a way that I wasn't getting and kind of helped me get to the next level. And yeah, technicians like that have, yeah, been all around me. New York has been a great source of inspiration, whether it's through the guild or just through meeting different people in the field and whatnot.
yeah, yeah, New York. I wasn't that involved in the guild when I was in the Chicago area for whatever reason. I had met up a few times with a couple of guys, and um, but I remember coming to New York and getting involved in the guild meetings, and yeah, it's a very cool vibe in New York, especially. It's just like the people are at a higher level of the game. There's more people at the meetings, more engagement, more people that have interesting specialties to share about. It's definitely a special place in terms of being a member of the guild and interacting with the community there for sure.
Totally.
Um, so, all right, let's move on to Steinway. And then, of course, I think we want to spend probably a majority of the time. It seems like you've got some interesting things to share about kind of your philosophy of sales, but talking about your experience at Steinway will probably be a good transition. So, how did that all happen? Did you just get a call? Oh, Steinway's looking for someone, or did you just like call them and show up and see if they needed a position, or how did that all come together?
Yeah, great question. That would have been nice, a phone call. I would have taken that call for sure. But sadly, that was not the case. It was a very long uphill battle. I applied over at Steinway because I had a friend of a friend who was working there both as a technician, and I had another friend of a friend working there in sales. So I knew a few faces, though I wouldn't say I had like an in by any means. And Brian's shop was transitioning. It was unclear whether he was going to move to a new location, whether he was going to close up shop and move into another type of business. So I was looking for employment. So I just applied. I emailed them. I went through the website. They oftentimes have job postings at a certain section of their site. And I definitely reached out to my friends and I said, hey, if you can by any chance mention that my resume is coming through, that'd be great. I think, I'd be a great candidate and I'd love to have a talk with whoever's involved. And I definitely, in the interview process, I keep an attitude of not, will you have me, but more so, here's why I think I would be a great fit. And I think that's a mindset thing where, I want the company to know I think I have something of value to give them. And ultimately, I ended up doing, I think, 3 or 4 different interviews over the course of, like I said, 3 to 4 months. So, yeah, I had no idea I was going to get the job, but I eventually got the job. And certainly, I had people like Brian. I had a few colleagues or musician friends like Jason Moran, who wrote me letters of recommendation. Dan Tepfer served as a reference for me. So, a lot of these musicians and people that I met along the way really went to bat for me during that like interview process. And I'm sure that their referrals, meant just as much as everything I was trying to communicate in the interview process. But definitely was a little mentally, and spiritually fraught, just that whole period of time not knowing, will I make it? What should I start applying at other places. And to be fair, I actually did apply at two or three other piano companies in New York City, and I was offered jobs, but I was just holding out for Steinway. It's where I wanted to work. I spent my whole life listening to records recorded on Steinways, listening to musicians that play on Steinways. So there's definitely something about the company mystically that was like drawing me there. So I kind of put all my eggs in one basket after a certain point, and yeah, eventually I got the call saying, yes, we would like to have you. And I kind of started my journey there. Initially, I was supposed to be a piano technician and go down that route. And they ultimately decided or offered me an opportunity to get into sales. And that was kind of a total shift. I knew that while I was working at the smaller shop with Brian, I definitely had a knack for talking to people. I don't know if it was my experience in the service industry, my experience as a solo piano player, just constantly talking to different people, but I definitely love talking about the work. I get really passionate about talking about piano concepts, and I love explaining difficult ideas in simple ways, metaphorically or just broken down. So yeah, I decided they also said I would make more money. And you have to understand being a musician kind of broke your whole life when someone says, "Oh, we have another job for you. You'll do way better. You'll make way more money." It kind of was a little alluring. So yeah, I went down the road of sales and gosh, I learned a lot. I mean, like I mentioned, I was bringing a lot to the table, but I had a lot to learn. Um, let's see, I'm going to kind of check in with some of my notes.
Sure.
Um,
And actually, I'll use this opportunity to say, for if you're out there on Facebook and YouTube, this is a point where we're going to sign off from the stream that's going out to the public. And then if you would like to continue the conversation, if you're watching live, go ahead and click the link that we'll put in the chat and jump here on the Zoom call with us, and you can stick around a little bit. And if you can't do that right now, or you're catching this limited recording at a later date, sign up for Piano Tech Radio Hour, and you can catch the recording in our member area. But yeah, we'll move on. Having said that, into this process, I'll just make a few comments.